Habari Gani, Umoja. Greetings, Ubuntu family, upstate communities, family, and friends. We have reached the end of another year, one of many ups and downs. We have experienced the unprecedented and cleave to the familiar. We have tried to make sense of days, weeks, months, and now another year gone by, maybe individually and now together. Kwanzaa is an annual time of reflection, and it's an honor to be here with you in spirit until we can all safely be together. And soon we will be able to express this beginning principle, unity, in its fullness. I would like to dedicate this presentation to an elder, Dr. Mariba Kelsey, and a recent ancestor, Dr. Joe Benton. Here is a picture of the two of them, and here they are along with Dr. Gunn, sitting with my students at Claflin University in November 2019, 4 months before the campus and the country, no, actually the entire world was forced to pivot into new ways of doing things. However, new paths moving forward have the best outcomes, I find, when the foundation is formed by people who have a particular kind of wisdom and lived experience and who want to share that wisdom with others for the benefit of the many. Years ago, I heard Baba Mariba Kelsey say, and I'm paraphrasing, that we should not want to agree to disagree. That when we are building community, that we have to agree to agree. And that agreeing to agree is not simply sitting with people who only think the way that you think, or people who are too fearful to express differing opinions or experiences. That it is sometimes the long and tedious work of listening, of building trust and working out the kinks to get to agreement versus the domination of majority or minority opinions. Baba Mariba Kelsey has a book that is titled Being Healthy and Wealthy, A Process for African People. And this book is a blueprint for how we can work on unity in our communities within and across generations. I use this book with my students, and I think it's a guide for rites of passage, not only in a narrow way in which we think about rites of passage for young people, but a process for us all moving through life. Now, some may be familiar with the book by Don Miguel Ruiz, The Four Agreements. And in this book, Ruiz writes that the first agreement is to be impeccable with your word, to speak with integrity, say only what you mean, to stay away from using the word to speak negatively of yourself or of others, and to use the power of your word in the way of love and truth. The second agreement is to not take anything personally, that nothing others do is because of you, that that's a reflection of their own reality. And when you are unaffected by the opinions and actions of others, that you will be free of pointless suffering. The third agreement is to not make assumptions, to have the courage to ask questions and to express what you really want, to communicate with others as clearly as possible to avoid misunderstandings, sadness, and drama. And Ruiz writes that this alone can change your life. And then the fourth agreement is to always do your best. Your best is going to change from moment to moment. It will be different when you are healthy and when you are sick, and in situations to simply do your best, and you will avoid self-judgment, self-abuse, and regret. So in thinking about this idea of 4 agreements, the question that I asked in preparation for today is, on what might we agree to agree in 2022? I have here a Bakongo cosmograph that symbolizes an African belief in the cycle of life. And this is very much consistent with the stages that Dr. Kelsey takes readers through when he is talking about those rites of passage. That there are certain rites of passage for our youth, for elders, for preparation in becoming ancestors, and then preparation for those to come or for the yet unborn. And so I started thinking about how might we develop some things upon which we can agree, or some agreements for 2022 in regards to our youth and the yet unborn, representing our recent future as well as our distant future. How we might agree on some things in regard to our elders who are representative of our recent past through their wisdom and experiences, and then how we might agree on some things in regards to our more distant past, which is representative in the lives of our ancestors, both those whose bloodlines we share and those people from the past who we seek to emulate. People like Harriet Tubman, Martin Delaney, David Walker, Mariah Stewart, Ida B. Wells, W.E.B. Du Bois, Booker T. Washington, the Garveys, Marcus Mosiah Garvey, Amy Jacques Garvey, Amy Ashwood Garvey, Martin Luther King Jr., Coretta Scott King, Malcolm X, Betty Shabazz, Rosa Parks, Stokely Carmichael, Fannie Lou Hamer, Ella Baker, Jacob Carruthers, and scores of people with whom we share bloodline, we share ideas, and that we can use as models for our everyday lives. So the first agreement, our children are our future. We have to be intentional about how we craft the world and the spaces they enter into. Certainly COVID-19 has taught us to be so much more intentional about building empathy. We should also be especially in tune to the ways in which our children may need some significant kind of healing around socialization, around conflict resolution, around the loss of grandparents or elders or anyone they were close to. There are lots of children's books that talk about some of these ideas and give young people some things to think about that may be going on within them, and that we can help them in terms of building some resiliency. Not only should we get books for our kids, but we should get caught reading to our young people and have them catch us reading so that we can model that idea of seeking solutions and really building community and unity. Whether they are our biological children, or as you see here in the picture, a group of 7-year-olds that I spent time with this summer, teaching them Africana studies for about 6 weeks. I gave them books. I read to them and with them. building on that love of reading and learning, and just remembering that these children are our rising sun. They represent the dawning of the day that is full of possibilities. And if we agree that we will plan for them thoughtfully. The second agreement is that our elders are our libraries to the past. And so throughout this year, 2021, I've been asking people, young and old, to sit with the oldest living relative in their family or someone who is representative in their communities, and asking them, at the minimum, these 8 questions. What was the world like during your childhood? Who were your friends when you were growing up? What is your favorite childhood story or memory? What do you remember of your parents? What do you remember of your grandparents? Who was the person who taught you important lessons? What's your favorite adult memory? And what do you want young people to know? And then, so interviewing elders and sitting with grandparents, or even people who have raised us, but asking them different questions about their life, has led to some very different outcomes for students in my classes at Claflin. That they are sitting with those grandparents and asking them about their own parents and grandparents, and literally asking them to fill in those family trees so that we can get a sense of how far back we can go. But even if we can't go back further than a generation or two, to start those family trees right now, so that the next generation who is coming behind us will not have to say that they can only go back 1 generation or 2 generations, to make sure that we are writing those trees down, because those visual representations will give us not only a sense of who to talk to, the oldest living relative, but then who to talk to after that, and who to talk to after that, and who to talk to after that. And so in that regard, we can think about our elders as libraries, and then in the same way that we would go to the library and take a book off the shelf, and one book leads to the next book, and one book leads to the next book, that to sit with our elders, we are having that same kind of experience. It reinforces this understanding that they are our libraries to our past, and that we want to get their stories. We want to read those human repositories while they are still with us. The third agreement: our ancestors are our archives, that we might be encouraged to take out those family Bibles, to sit down with the family historians, to write down those birth dates, those marriages, those death dates, to have the records and follow them as far back as we can, and then find out ways that we can share that information, so that people might be thinking, I don't know my particular bloodline, but because I have read these wider records, I know what people in the Greenville area, people in the Spartanville area, Spartanburg area, people who were in Newberry were doing in the early 1900s, in the 1800s. To treat those pieces of past lives like they are archival records that we should be building on in a variety of ways and accessing widely, so that we can better understand who we are collectively as a people. Our ancestors are our archives. And I think that one of the beautiful examples of thinking about our ancestors as our archives is If we can't get to the family Bible, if we can't access some of those historical records, we can read Zora Neale Hurston's Barracoon. This is a book I have my students read because Hurston interviews Kosala Lewis, and Lewis was brought here from what is now modern day Benin, enslaved in Alabama a few years before the Civil War. He was brought as a teenager, and so his memories of growing up in his homeland and then being brought to the United States are clear. And he was able to convey, as an 80-year-old, a man who had raised his children, was spending time with his grandchildren, and was preparing for his own transition, but he was ready to tell his life's story. And he told it to Hurston. So this idea of our ancestors and people like Kosala Lewis, reading them as an archive of freedom, of enslavement, and then emancipation is available for us to take in, to absorb, even if you're not in his bloodline. That reading that experience is almost like digging in the archives and having our ancestors be that deep well that we can use to reach even further back in our cultural past. The fourth agreement, after we have tended to our children or our futures, tended to our immediate past by sitting with the elders, and then mining the stories of our ancestors for the much longer genealogy and cultural past, is to see that now is the time for self-care. We have had to slow down to think about how to do some things differently. And what many of us have discovered is that we don't need a gym or fancy equipment, that we can hit the pavement and take a few steps with someone in our own households in the fresh air, that we can set our own pace and take ourselves walking 20, 25, 30 minutes a day. We can experience all kinds of health benefits when we walk, when we grow something healthy for ourselves. Some people have expansive gardens, and some people grow things in a few large pots on the carport, on the deck, in the backyard. And then still some people grow herbs in small pots in a windowsill that they add to food that they have brought. More of us are patronizing farmers markets or co-ops too. All of it is beneficial. And I'm thinking about my sister Jonica, who is a master teacher when it comes to agriculture and has all kinds of helpful tips for any kind of growing. We need to do more of that. We need to be in control of the things that we do with our bodies, the things that we take into our bodies. And then I would suggest, in terms of that self-care, a book by the late Dr. Nicholas C. Cooper-Luter, Black Grief and Soul Therapy. Especially during this time of COVID-19, the loss of people, the loss of time, loss of a sense of self, that we need to be doing some work around how we can build a sense of transformation so that we are not stuck in loss or grief, or that we try to skip over it and think that we are fine when we are not, and that we don't take the time to work through that process in a healthy way. In the development of self-care, the physical development, how we move, and then how we mentally transform ourselves in this moment is so critical, so that we are working through our grief in ways that are useful and not something that we will carry with us to compound into other situations, and certainly not to compound into or across generations. So I have referenced 4 agreements for 2022. 4 things that hopefully we can agree to agree. Our children are our future. Our elders are our libraries to the past. Our ancestors are our archives. And now is the time for self-care. With these words, I hope that these 4 things can help us to really focus on unity or Umoja for this Kwanzaa season, and to set the tone for the remaining principles of a Kwanzaa: Kujijagalia, self-determination; Ujima, collective work and responsibility; Ujima, cooperative economics; Nia, purpose; Kuumba, creativity; and Imani, faith. We focus on unity or Umoja, and if we can agree to agree in our 4 areas of moving forward in 2022, that maybe we might have some clarity about the remaining principles for this week, but not just for the week, that maybe we can think about living Kwanzaa for the next 365 days of the coming year. To you all, I say happy Kwanzaa, thank you, and Madasi, Ashe.